So tell me about your mom. What was she like?
She was very fun, very active. Loved doing all sorts of activities, anything outdoors.
In the truest sense of the word, Sue Crump was a caregiver to her family.
She volunteered a lot, volunteered at my elementary school when I was little.
To her pets.
Biggest passion was her dogs. Always going to take them for ice cream.
And not least, to thousands of patients.
My mom became a pharmacist after high school.
Sue Crump spent more than 23 years as a pharmacist working at Seattle area hospitals and health facilities. She was a mixer who prepared chemotherapy drugs for cancer patients.
She loved that idea that, you know, these medications were helping people and saving people.
But after a life as a practitioner, Sue was suddenly the patient.
She was diagnosed May 1st, 2008. She went in for a CAT scan, and that's when they found the tumor on her pancreas.
By the time I was diagnosed, I'd already lost quite a bit of weight. By then, it's incurable.
For Sue and her family, the diagnosis was doubly alarming.
Or she was talking to a friend that she worked with in Swedish back in the 70s, and the friend said, "Welcome to the club." And my mom said, "What do you mean by welcome to the club?" And she said, basically listed off all the people my mom worked with at the time had had cancer of some kind.
Sue realized that many of those former co-workers had worked with or near chemotherapy drugs. She wondered if the life-saving drug she prepared for years was the cause of her cancer.
And just hearing one of my friends after another was coming down with either some very rare, exotic, bizarre disease, brain tumors, sarcoidosis, arrhythmias, or cancer.
So as cancer ravaged her body, Sue made two wishes: to see her daughter graduate from college and to share her story.
She said, you know, if I can help someone else, you know, my time has been cut short, but if it can prevent anyone else from having to go through what she did in my family, then she wanted to. She wanted people to know.
We think of them as medicines, and they're good things, and they help patients clearly, but they're also toxins, and there's a need for worker protections.
Carol Smith is a reporter for Investigate West. She learned of Sue's story from her daughter Chelsea, a journalism student at Western Washington University.
Some of my colleagues were up at Western, and we were talking to some journalism students up there, and there was a student in one of those classes who tracked down my editor, Rita Hibbard, in the parking lot.
I think I kind of startled her because I was going, "Excuse me, ma'am, I have a story for you?"
And she said, "You know, my mom has a story to tell," and so we pursued it from there.
As a former medical reporter, Carol already knew some facts about chemotherapy drugs.
Well, many of the most common drugs used today, some of the real standards like Cytoxan and so forth, are descended from mustard gas, which was used in World War I, obviously, to kill people. And they realized that these agents actually could kill blood cells. The good part of that was that they could use that to attack cancers. And so that's sort of the genesis of our modern day chemotherapy.
But they're hardcore drugs.
They're poison.
As we know that most of these drugs, or many of them I should say, are carcinogenic, which is this bizarre irony that you're treating cancer with a drug that can cause cancer.
Seth Eisenberg is a nurse with the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. He's also a safety advocate and travels the country advising healthcare workers about safe drug handling. Eisenberg says there are multiple problems with chemo drugs. First, even a small amount is dangerous, a drop or even vapors.
We can have contamination. We can have contamination while the nurse is hanging the bag. So bags generally have a part where you pull it off, then you have to put a spike inside the bag.
This video from the University of Utah shows how vapors can escape during the mixing process. Second, Eisenberg says when there is a spill, chemo drugs are difficult to clean and don't go away.
It may dry up, it may evaporate, it may turn into a powder. It may get tracked on your shoes. You may track it down the hallway. You may track it into the nurse's lounge. You may track it into your car. You may even take it home with you, but it won't go away.
Finally, the risk from chemo drugs is long-term.
Again, it'd be like taking a couple drags of a cigarette at a party. You're not going to get lung cancer from that, but we worry about somebody smoking for 20 years.
Back in the 70s and 80s, when Sue Crump was mixing, there was little awareness of the risk, and few precautions were taken.
They didn't have any specific regulations separating chemo from other mixing. As I recall, we didn't even wear gloves at the time. I think it finally became optional. They offered gloves.
By the early 1980s, awareness began to grow. A stream of studies, mostly out of Europe, began to link chemo exposure to health problems, including miscarriages and some cancers. Hospitals began to take some safety precautions, like the use of special airflow hoods. Workers prepared the chemo drugs under the hood, and a stream of air kept any spills contained. But even the early hoods didn't recognize the risk.
It blows the air out from you, and you're to mix in the middle of the thing, but the air flows in your direction past you.
Which meant if there was a spill, chemo agents could actually blow into the mixer's face.
It would shoot out a fine spray, and you could see it landing on you, but then you were supposed to turn, finish your process in the cleanliness and then go wash off.
In the mid-'80s, with evidence growing, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, a division of the Centers for Disease Control, began formulating guidelines for the safe handling of chemotherapy drugs. Then in 2004, NIOSH updated its guidelines and issued a major alert. The warning, which cites dozens of studies, says working with or near hazardous drugs in healthcare settings may cause skin rashes, infertility, miscarriage, birth defects, and possibly leukemia and other cancers. But NIOSH is not a regulating agency. That job falls to OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Surprisingly, Investigate West discovered that while OSHA classifies chemotherapy agents as hazardous drugs, there are no regulations that deal specifically with the handling of chemotherapy drugs.
They have a kind of a catch-all called the general duty clause that allows them to go in and say, we don't think that's safe and you should do something about it. And the reality is, in the last 10 years, it only came up one time that in all of the clinics and hospitals that they looked at, it only came up once that someone looked at hazardous chemical handling.
In a statement responding to this story, OSHA told us that although this is an important safety and health issue, OSHA has not considered a standard to specifically address hazardous drugs in the healthcare setting. Unfortunately, OSHA doesn't have the resources to issue standards covering every safety and health hazard facing workers. With no active enforcement by OSHA, in our state the burden falls on the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries. John Furman is an occupational nurse consultant with L&I.
Well, we have a regulation called the Employer Chemical Hazard Communications Standard, and it requires employers to protect employees from exposure to all hazardous chemicals in the workplace. And hazardous drugs are covered under that standard.
But Furman admits resources are a challenge.
As you know, we don't have enough inspectors to inspect every workplace in the state of Washington every year, and for the most part we respond to complaints from employees when they have a concern in regards to hazards in their workplace. So in most instances, the only time that we are in hospitals is when we receive a complaint.
Still, many hospitals are voluntarily following the guidelines established by NIOSH and other organizations. We went to Swedish Medical Center in Seattle, one of the places where Sue Crump once worked.
We average about 150 doses a day of chemotherapy.
Pharmacy manager Lanny Toure showed us the safety precautions they take every day.
Mixers have to wear double gloves because they're having the most exposure, and he's also wearing chemo sleeves.
Also using the most advanced airflow hoods, which no longer blow air toward the mixer.
So in this actual hood here, which is a vertical flow hood, it has air coming in vertically that goes through what's called a HEPA filter, which filters any particulate matter, even bacteria.
Countertops and the outside of the hoods are wiped down each day with anti-chemo cleaning agents. After drugs are mixed, they use needleless connectors on IV bags.
It doesn't allow any air to go in or out. So when it's disconnected, there's no chance of aerosolization of this chemotherapy, which could be hazardous if it was inhaled or got on your skin.
Toure admits Swedish takes such extensive precautions because it's the right thing to do and because they can afford it.
It's expensive to provide this therapy. Swedish has done this as a service to the patients because we know it's the right thing to do, but it's costing us over $150,000 just for this campus to provide that safety. Sue Crump would be pleased to see what she would see today.
You know, I mean, we're taking the risk. You know? So that's, I guess, the only story. Other than I'm just gonna live with it and keep going on as long as I can. Because I can't change it.
Sue Crump died on September 13th last year. She did not live to see her daughter graduate. Chelsea took a semester off from school to care for her mother during her final months. But she did see the beginning of her second wish, a mission passed from mother to daughter.
I want to keep things going for her, and I want her to live on. I mean, she's given me so much in my life, and this is a way for me to give back to her and to honor my mom. And at 22, it's really hard to, you know, move on without your mom.
Had a great life. No regrets.